In this video, I will demonstrate how to make a tripod vessel. For this assignment, we're going to be working with slabs of clay. And this is the template that we're going to be using. So we're going to start off with a 7-inch by 12-inch slab of clay that we'll cut to template here shortly. So I've already rolled out my slab. The thickness of my slab is about a 1/2 inch thick. So these slabs are a little bit thicker maybe than what we're used to working with. And the reason that we want to have our slabs a little bit thicker, that will allow us to carve the clay if we decide to carve the clay. It's also going to help us to create a lid to put on top of these. We are going to be working with soft slabs for this project. So whenever we're working with soft slab, we want to work with the clay the same day that we put it through the slab roller, or if we're at home, the same day that we roll out our slab. So while our clay is still soft. So I already have my clay rolled out. My template fits on top of it. So I'm going to start by compressing both sides of my slab using my rubber kidney. And as I do this, I want to be careful because my clay is soft. I don't want to scrape away too much, but doing this is going to help make your slab more sturdy. So make sure that you're going from multiple directions as you're compressing your slabs. And also it's very important that we flip these over and we compress both sides of the clay to make our clay nice and strong. So I'm going to spend a few minutes compressing my clay, and then we'll talk about the next step. When I flip my slab, because these are kind of big, be very careful when you flip these. I'm going to keep mine on my mat that I'm working on, and I'm going to slide my hand underneath my mat, and I'm going to transfer arms like this, and then I can pull my mat off so that my slab's not drooping. And then I'll carefully lay it back down and compress the back side. The next thing to do is going to be to cut to the template. Before I cut, I just want to make sure my clay is not sticking to my work surface, because I don't want to distort the clay as I pull it up after it's been cut. So I'm just going to make sure I'm not sticking. I'm going to carefully place my template on top of my slab here. And because we're working with soft clay, we want to be especially careful as we cut these out. I'm going to use a straight edge to help me cut along my template. Okay, so I have just a straight edge. It could be a ruler, it could be a piece of wood, any sort of thing that has a nice straight edge to it. And I'm going to place this on top of my template. It's going to help hold my template down. It's also going to give me a surface to cut against. So just lining up the edge of my straight edge with the edge of my template here. And when I cut, I want to make sure that I keep my cutting tool straight up and down. It's also a good idea to make sure your tools are clean before you start. I'm going to save some of this extra soft clay that I cut away. We will need to make a reinforcement coil with some of this, so I'll put it in my bag as soon as I'm done cutting all of these, and I'll save that extra. If you end up with a lot of extra slab, we'll be rolling another piece of slab for our lids later. If you want to just save that for a lid, it might be enough for a lid, depending on how much clay you have left over. Okay, So now that I have my slab cut to template, my slab's been compressed, we're gonna be ready to start building with these. So we're gonna be turning this into a cylinder to get started. So if we look at the template here, this is the top. So the 12 inches goes along the top, the 7 inches goes up and down. If you're working on this at home, you'll want to make a template before you roll out your slab of clay, so make sure you know the measurements. And then if we bring the shorter edges together, this is what's going to create our cylinder that we'll use for this assignment. So whenever we're attaching two pieces of clay together, we should already know that we need to slip and score to create a nice join. You also may know that a beveled edge is going to join better than just a regular cut edge. So right now, the way the clay is cut, so like if you could imagine, if we were to join the two pieces of clay together, they're going to join cut end to cut end, okay? But if we had a beveled cut, the clay is almost going to like lay on top of each other, okay? And this is going to give more surface area for them to join together. So in class, we have some tools that we can use. They're called bevel cutters. And we have two different kinds. Hold on, let me grab the other kind. Okay, so we have two different types of bevel cutters. They're just two different brands. They're gonna do the same thing. We have one here that looks kind of block-like, boxy, and you'll see that one side says 60 degrees, the other says 45 degrees. So the angle of the wire here, there's a wire that wraps around this. This is a 45-degree angle, and this is a 60-degree angle. For this particular project, we want to use the 60-degree angle. We also have tools that look like this. Okay, so the same idea. On the shorter side, this is the 45-degree angle. On the longer side, this is the 60-degree angle. So both of these tools are going to do the same thing. When we do this, when we use these tools, we want to be gentle because the wire is just kind of sitting along here. And if we press too hard, the wire is going to pull off from the wood part down here. If that happens, bring it to me and I can fix it. So I'm just going to be kind of gentle when I do this. I'm using the longer side, which is going to be the 60-degree angle, and I'm going to miter cut both of my short edges. But I'm going to be very careful because this is one piece of clay that's going to join to itself. We have to make sure that we're getting our mitered edges correct. Now, if I were doing this project at home and I did not have a bevel tool to cut my mitered edges, I can use a straight edge and a knife. When I do this is going to be a little bit different than the lidded slab boxes that we've done in class. At whatever angle you bevel, so let's say that I bevel here. When I do the other side, I want to make sure that my fettling knife or my knife, whatever kind of knife I'm using, is going in the same direction. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to move over to here. So if I were going to do this, I would say about a ½ inch in from the edge of my slab. I'll hold my straight edge, and then I'm going to find the angle that I'm looking for, and whatever angle you do here, you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I would then glide my ruler, if I were doing this, okay, I would glide my ruler, keeping it at that same edge as I cut off to create my bevel, and then I would flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. All right, I'm going to use the bevel cutter since there are more people in class using it. All right, so when I do this, the flat part is going to sit down on the table. I'm lining up the edge of my slab with this little edge, this little edge here where the wire is meeting the wood. Right here is where I want my slab to sit. And then I also want to catch the other end of the bevel cutter down here as I do this. So I'm just going to go nice and slow. And then my thumb's going to catch it at the other end just so I don't ruin my beveled edge there. And I can pull this piece off. Now, because this clay is ready to go on this side, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to score this edge here before I flip this over. So I'm going to just grab my scoring tool. And I want to make sure that I score this where this is going to join together pretty well. Okay, so now before I do my next mitered edge or my next beveled edge, it's going to be on the other side of the slab. So I have to flip this over so that I can get the right cut, right? So I'm just going to carefully lift up my slab and flip it over. Okay, now this side is now where the beveled edge is that I just cut. So I'm still working on the same side. So after you flipped it, this side has a beveled edge already, even though we can't see it. This side doesn't. So this is the side that I would need to cut. So the same thing, I'm using the 60-degree angle. And then I'm also going to take a few minutes to score this beveled edge that I just created as well. All right, so at this point I can add some slip to my edges here. So I'm just going to put slip on this side. I think if I just put slip on this side, because the clay is so plastic, this should be enough. I don't have to try to flip it over and do the other side. All right, so now I'm going to carefully stand this up, and I'm noticing my hands are kind of starting to dry out, so I'm just going to spray a little bit of water and rub that in just so that I don't get any bone-dried clay embedded into my slab. And I'm going to carefully stand this up. Okay, so I'm going to stand up my slab, and I'm going to bring my mitered edges, start curving it away from me, okay? And what I found is that I want to have my seam where my fingertips are and not where my palms are. So let me just show you. I'm going to slowly start to curve these edges together. I'm doing this away from me. And then when I get to about here where it looks almost like a U, I'm going to start slowly bringing these edges in and overlapping my bevels. All right, so once I kind of get it started, I like to start at the top and make sure that my seam up at the top looks like it's fitting in correctly. And then I'm going to start walking this down. It's also going to be important, you might have to readjust a couple of times to get this more circular. So I'm going to actually flip mine over. And then I'm going to use my fingers, okay, not my palm. So the seam is away from me, and I'm using my fingers. I'm kind of looking down at it from above, and I'm using my fingers to kind of pull the seam together like this. I'm also going to go in a little bit on the inside and just make sure that it's sticking down right. And while I have the clay in this form, I want to try to get it as round, as circular as I can. All right, so I'm going to switch to working on my banding wheel at this point, and I'm just going to put like a piece of paper towel down underneath so that my clay doesn't stick to my banding wheel. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do once your seam is joined together and your cylinder is pretty round, we'll be able to round them out a little bit more as we go along here. But the next thing that we want to do is we're going to compress our seam. When we do this, I would recommend using your rubber kidney on the outside. When we compress the clay, it's making it stronger. It's also going to help this join that we created. We're going to get rid of that seam and it's just going to make it stronger. So you can do this facing you. I'm going to do it facing the camera so that you can see, but you're basically, hold on, before I do that, this, when we're looking at our slabs before we blend our seam, this side of my wall is going in this direction and the inside wall is going like, they're like crossing each other this way. So I want to make sure I'm going with the outside edge. Okay, so this is where my seam is. I don't want to pull towards the seam. I want to pull kind of almost like with the piece of clay that goes around in this direction. So it's also a good idea if you're able to support the clay on the inside to support the clay on the inside. So basically you could have your hand on the inside and be compressing on the outside. It's kind of awkward for me at this angle, so I'm just going to do my best here for you to see. Right, I'm going to just swing this around towards me so I can look at it a little bit better. Just make sure I compressed it well enough. So when you're done with the outside, so you can see that that seam is starting to vanish. That's what we want, so it should be going away. Now, when we move into the inside, it'll be hard to get our rubber kidney down inside of there. So instead, you're going to use one of your modeling tools. And I like the modeling tool that has more of a curved edge to it. I'm going to compress with this while I support the walls on the outside. And when I blend on the inside, I can go at the angle that the inside of the slab is going to kind of help make this seamless, to help support that seam so that it won't break through later. So I'm going at an angle and then I'm also going up and down just to get all around. I'll also flip it once I can't get any further, and make sure you're supporting the clay on the outside walls when you're doing this. One other thing, whenever you're flipping these over, it's really easy to distort them. So try to do so quickly and then readjust it as you sit it back down so that it stays round. I also like to compress the rim just a little bit. And then just double check to make sure everything looks round. So at this point I'm noticing that I have some like little surface cracks that started to open up from when I stretched my slab to create my cylinder. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes using my rubber kidney to just kind of blend in some of those surface cracks. We're going to do some more scraping with those later, so it's okay if they're not perfect. Please don't put water on these. Like right now, I'm just gonna kind of compress the clay one more time all the way around with my rubber kidney, and then we'll be using a different tool to help us really smooth these out in a little bit. So the next step for this project is to create the foot for our piece. Now normally we would construct the foot out of a separate piece of clay and then slip and score and attach our foot on. But for this project, we're just gonna form the clay, the cylinder, into a tripod. So I think I'm gonna readjust my camera a little bit just so that you can see up above a little bit more, and then I'll show you how we'll create our tripod foot. Okay, so hopefully this is a better view for you to be able to see what I'm about to show you. So for a tripod, they're gonna have 3 feet, okay? So when we do this, we wanna try to form our circle that we have here on our cylinder. We're gonna try to make it into an equilateral triangle. So you're basically gonna kind of form your hands in a triangle, and we're just gonna start kind of forming the clay, the bottom part of our walls, into an equilateral triangle. Now you're not gonna be able to get like corners on your triangle, but we want like the sides of the triangle to be equal. And I'm just gonna do a little bit just to get it started so that it's triangular shaped. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is going to be we're going to be using a new tool. Hold on a second. Okay, so for the next step, we're going to slowly start to curve the sides of the triangle inward so that we're going to create a foot at the points of each of the triangles. Now, for those of you in class, this is going to be a new tool that we haven't really used too much in class. This is called a metal rib, and it's basically kind of like your rubber kidney, but it's made out of metal. It's a little bit sharper, and it's going to help us to scrape and shape the clay. Now, if I were at home and I did not have a metal rib tool to use, there's some other things that you'll be able to find around your house that would work in place of this. So one thing that would work in place of the metal rib that I found, if you have an old gift card lying around, they're nice and flexible and they would work nicely. So I have this Dunkin' gift card here, and I could use this because it has a kind of a sharp edge to it, and I can curve it to help me. Okay, so the same thing with this metal rib, it could be bent and curved. If I don't have an old gift card, I can maybe find a thin piece of cardboard. So this came off of a Kleenex box. I just cut it into a smaller shape, and then this can be used for scraping, and it can be curved also, okay? So I'm going to use the metal tool, the metal rib tool, and so I'm going to make sure that I'm good to start. I'm going to start by, I'm going to have my tool is going to curve as I do this, and I'm going right along this edge, and I'm going to support the clay with my other hand as I do this. And basically, I'm trying to go from one corner to the next, and I'm pushing, I'm like kind of scraping and pushing down inward on that side of the triangle. I'm going to clean my tool often as I do this. I'm going to turn my wheel a little bit. I'm going to do this on this wall. You do want to make sure you're supporting your clay so that it doesn't get distorted. So I'm almost like rounding off the bottom as I do this. So it's going to start rounding inward, and these walls are going to slowly start to go together. And as you're shaping this, you are going to be scraping away some of the clay, but you want to be careful that you're not scraping away too much. This is why it's super important that we're doing this step while the clay is still plastic. If for some reason you don't finish all of this in a class period, it would be especially important to wrap these in damp paper towels so that they don't dry out, because we want to do most of the building while the clay is plastic or soft. I also want you to notice that I'm just doing like a little bit at a time. If I were to try to force this clay inward in one go, it's gonna probably crack or create surface cracks. So I want to try to keep it even. That's why I'm doing a little bit on each side at a time so I can keep that equilateral triangle. And one other thing, guys, we're going to be cleaning these up later. So there's going to be a few opportunities to kind of clean up the surface of these as we're working. So don't worry too much about it just yet. Okay, so once my sides of my triangle are starting to go inward, I want to look at this from above, and I'm going to just kind of adjust it while the clay is still soft. I want to make sure that I still have an equilateral triangle, and if one side's looking not symmetrical than the other, I can go back in and scrape away a little bit more. So I'm seeing that this side looks a little bit thicker. All right, so this is what I ended up with. All right, so it looks about like this. Depending on how much you're able to curve in your feet, this is what it looks like kind of from the side. Your triangle, that shape that you have on the inside may be a little bit bigger or smaller than mine. But what I'm gonna do before I go too much further, I'm just gonna try to score in these little points to my triangle and add just a little bit of slip in there. And then I'm just going to kind of pull those together. Almost let the seam overlap a little bit so that I get that triangular shape in the middle. So as I'm doing this, I'm looking at my triangle negative space right here that was created when I brought my feet together. Once that's holding pretty well, I'm going to go back in with my metal rib. I'm just going to compress the feet just a little bit more. All right, so the next thing that we have to do is we're going to have to create a bottom for this. So we need to plug up this open triangle that was created when we formed our feet. So I have a little bit of extra slab left. I'm going to go grab it, and I'll show you what to do with that. I'm just noticing before I do that, I'm gonna just look at my feet because something didn't seem right on mine. So I just want to check. This foot for some reason is seeming to be a little bit taller. So I'm gonna fix that up really quickly. I think I just scraped more away from my other ones. All right, I feel better about that. I'll go get the clay and we'll show you how to fill that up. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this off to the side for a minute. But I want to have it pretty close by so that I can make sure that my piece that I'm going to attach here will fit. So this slab that I have not yet compressed. So I'm going to take a minute to compress my slab before I cut the shape out that I need. All right, so when we create our like plug almost for the bottom of this, we're going to be cutting out a triangle that's slightly bigger than the triangle that was formed when you created your feet. So I want to go a little bit bigger. I want it to be an equilateral triangle, so equal sides. And if I need to trim it down a little bit, I can, but I want to make sure that it's long enough. If you wanted to use a ruler to get an idea. So mine is about, I'd say if I do about a 2-inch triangle, I think I'll go 2.5 just in case. So I'm just going to use this ruler to cut with. Okay, so here's my triangle. I'm just going to make sure that it's slightly bigger. If I need to trim it, looks like it needs to be trimmed a little bit. It's not going to fit in there perfectly. What we're going to do next is we're going to miter the edges of the triangle to make it kind of sit down inside of there. So I'm going to get my miter tool back out, my bevel cutter. This time I'm going to use the shorter side or the 45-degree angle, and I'm going to be mitering all 3 sides of my triangle. So again, I'm using the 45-degree angle this time. And I'm just going to very carefully miter cut all 3 sides of my triangle. And when you do this, you're basically creating almost like a little pyramid, but without the top on it. And this should then sit down inside of that little hole. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to score my clay. I'm going to score right around on the top, along the edges of my triangle. I'm also going to score the mitered edges that I just cut, my beveled edges. And then I'm just going to carefully fit that in there as best as I'm able. I'm going to just kind of tap down just a little bit to help fit that in there. I don't want to press too hard because I don't want to ruin my feet that I created, but I'm just kind of blending back and forth. And then I'm going to let this slip dry for a few minutes before I blend that. You could also use maybe a little bit of paper towel or a sponge. I got too much slip on there, so I'm just going to blot some of that off to help it dry a little bit more. I'm not going to let this dry for too long, just maybe like a few minutes until that slip is no longer quite so wet. And then we'll talk about the next step for the project. Okay, so now that the slip has had a few minutes to dry up, I'm going to go back in with either my rubber kidney or my metal rib tool, and I'm going to compress that triangle into position. And as I do this, I'm going to kind of scrape the clay a little bit so that it sits in there well and so that I don't see a seam. Be very gentle as you do this because you don't want to accidentally pull through the bottom. And remember that the metal rib tools can curve, which will help you to get the right angle that you need in order to blend. Do this a little bit at a time and then go back in and clean it up. One other thing, as you're smoothing this bottom part, you can use the metal rib tool to shape the clay. So if you're noticing that like one foot looks different than the other, just kind of gently shaving down on the inside can be helpful. We are trying to make these seamless, so keep that in mind. We don't want to see the seam of where you attach that middle piece. And again, right now I'm just trying to make it seamless. I'll be able to smooth some things out more later. So when I'm done with my bottom, it's gonna look kind of like this. No longer will we see that triangle from where that hole was created when we joined our feet together. Okay, so we're gonna do one more thing on these today for the first part of the assignment. So right now where we created our 3 feet, that space on the inside of our project is hollow. And because those are hollow, they're not going to support the weight of the walls and then the lid and all of the other things that we're gonna be adding onto these. So we wanna reinforce our feet. So I'm gonna move this out of the way for a second. Let me grab this. So here I have a little drawing of what your cylinder would look like if we were to set it on its feet right now. So you can see we have our cylinder, we have the thickness of our walls, and we have our 3 feet down at the bottom. So right now in our feet, this is where they're hollow. So we're gonna fill in the bottoms of our feet on the inside. It's like going in from the top inside of here to create almost like a reinforcement for our feet. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off with a little piece of soft clay, and I'm just gonna start off by making one of these, and once I decide this is a good size for my little plugs that I'm gonna make, then I'll do 2 more. So I'm just gonna take this and so I want a piece of clay that's gonna fit inside of there, but the way our feet are is they're gonna taper a little bit, almost like a carrot tapers to a point. So I'm gonna start off by rolling a piece of clay into a sphere, and I wanna make sure that that sphere would easily be able to fit inside of my foot. And then I'm just gonna roll, I'm gonna move this for a second. I'm gonna roll one side of it. So I'm just kind of like tapering one edge of my little clay sphere so that it almost goes to a rounded point. It kind of be cone shaped. And if we go back to the drawing here, you'll be able to see that if I were to take this in from the inside and put it down into the foot, okay, and if I were to do that with the other feet, I'll then blend that in, and that's gonna make my feet solid. Okay, so I'm gonna make 2 more of these that are about the same size. And you do wanna make sure you're using soft clay for this. So we saved some of our slab that we cut away. This would be a good use for some of that extra slab that you cut. Okay, so at this point, hopefully you've noticed that I have not yet sat my project down on its foot, and that's because the feet are not ready to be sat down on. So before I flip this over, I'm gonna get these little pieces ready to be inserted into my cylinder. I'm gonna be holding my cylinder as I insert those little pieces of clay inside of it. So I'm going to start off by just scoring just the tapered end of these. The top part is going to be blended in. So I'm going to just score all the way around. All right, now when I put these inside, I'm gonna be holding my cylinder in my hand, so I'm not setting it on its foot. If I needed to set this back down before I'm finished, then I would wanna set it back down on its rim. And let's see, I don't know if you can see inside of there, it's kind of dark, but inside here, when I look inside of mine, I'm gonna notice that I can still see the triangle from where I slip and scored that bottom part on. I'll blend all of that out as I blend my coils. So I'm gonna go ahead, get my slip over here. I'm gonna add some slip to my coil here. And then if you're able to reach inside here with your scoring tool and score the inside of the foot a little bit, that would be helpful. It's really not completely necessary as long as your clay is still soft. But if you're able to get it a little bit, that would be helpful. Then I'm gonna take one of my pieces here and I'm gonna put it down in there. If you have a hard time, especially if you have big hands, it might be hard to reach down in there. So you could use your pin tool. So I can put one of these. I can kind of put one of these on my pin tool like this. And then I can guide it down into the foot. And then I'm just gonna kind of like swirl it around, kind of twist my pin tool around until, all right, once the piece of clay is in there, it's obviously not gonna be blended yet. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna blend. When we do this, we're gonna be using a wooden spoon handle, and I thought I had one here, so let me just grab my wooden spoon. So there'll be enough of these for you each probably to have your own. If you're working at home, hopefully you have a wooden spoon or a silicone spoon or some sort of a long-handled spoon that you can fit inside. The nice thing about the wooden spoon is that it's going to, the clay won't stick as much to it. So where I have that little piece of clay on the inside, I'm gonna go in with my wooden spoon and I'm just gonna kind of press down into the foot. I wanna be careful though, because I don't want to like break through the bottom of my foot here. So I'm just gonna do this really carefully. And I'm making sure that I'm kind of holding. So this is the foot that I'm working on right now on the inside. So I wanna support that on the outside as I start to kind of squish the clay in the foot. And then as I'm gonna just kind of use my spoon to kind of compress and blend all the way around. And I'm kind of also just kind of gently tapping the clay down in there. And then just a little bit at a time. I'm gonna blend in that piece of clay. I'm also gonna turn my piece occasionally so that I can scrape and blend from a different direction. And then I'll do the same thing for my other feet. Okay, so I just finished kind of blending the inside, and as I was blending my little plugs for my feet, I also took the time to blend my bottom, okay, the best that I was able to with the spoon, okay? So at this point, I'm gonna just look at my bottom and make sure nothing opened back up when I was putting force on the inside. So that looks pretty good. At this point, I'm ready. I can set this on its foot. So I'm gonna move some of this out of the way because I made a mess on my banding wheel. But I wanna set this down. And before I put this away for today, I just wanna spin my banding wheel. I wanna make sure that everything still looks symmetrical and that the top of my project is still pretty even, okay? So in the next video, I will be showing you how to create a belly for these. So we'll kind of be bumping out this bottom part to make it bulge outward, and then up towards the rim, we're gonna collar it in and then have it flare out. So that'll happen in part 2. In part 2, I'll also show you another way of creating a flange on the inside here. And then part 3, we'll talk about how to make a lid for these, and then how we're gonna finish them up. One other thing, when we put these away today, so because I have my plugs in the feet, I'm okay to keep it standing on its foot. If I didn't finish this, I'd want to flip it upside down. But we want our clay to stay pretty soft. So I'm going to wrap mine with damp paper towel, and then I'm going to store this in my bag. And I'm going to make sure my bag has no holes in it and make sure that it's closed so that these don't dry out. When we do the next step, the clay needs to be soft or you'll get cracks in your clay. So again, damp paper towel, not soaking wet.